Dear students, welcome to this program on neuropsychology. Before that, I would like to introduce myself. I am Dr. Viren Pratap Yadav, Assistant Professor of Psychology, Shyama Prasad Mukherjee College for Women, University of Delhi. So, you are most welcome to this program where we would be studying neuropsychology. As we all are aware that psychology is a branch of study which tries to understand human behavior. What are the psychological basis of our behavior, what we do, what is the psychological basis of those responses. So in that series we can see that there is a very specialized branch of psychology which deals with human behavior and brain connection, that is called neuropsychology. So it is a very emerging branch of psychology which really try to understand the connection between human behavior and brain. So we will try to understand what actually neuropsychology is. We can understand that there is a very umbrella term, neurosciences. This is a field which contains many of the subfields and sub-areas where we apply knowledge of various disciplines to study human brain, because human brain is a very complex process. So any single discipline cannot understand in wholesome way or in complete way. With a single discipline it is difficult to understand. So in taking those complexity into regard, we can take help of many of the subjects which really can understand and give us better understanding about human brain. So in that context, neuropsychology is a very scientific, specialized and technical branch of psychology which actually understand the functioning of human brain and how it has an impact on our behavior, because human behavior is again very vast. Behavior is not limited to any single activity, any single aspects, but it encompasses many of the behaviors which we really try to understand. Like if we try to understand what behavior is, it definitely in your mind would be coming that what is behavior. So behavior can be understood as any kind of response, any kind of action or reaction, responses towards any of the stimulus. But how those responses take place? Suppose we visualize any stimulus and we blink our eyes as per the intensity of the stimulus. So this is again a response, again a behavior where neural connections are playing important role. Actually our human behavior is, human brain is playing vital role in determining those responses. So in that context, neuropsychology can be undertaken, can be understood as a subfield of behavioral science, or you can say behavioral neuroscience. It is also known as biological psychology, psychobiology and behavioral biology, because as we have initial understanding that it is related to applied sciences or interdisciplinary sciences. So apart from psychology, other areas of study or other branches are also being taken into consideration where we can better understand about human brain and behavior. So that way neuropsychology provides us an opportunity to delve into the functioning of human behavior, functioning of human brain, role of brain in behavior. So taking those aspects forward, as we have some understanding that neuropsychology is a behavioral neuroscience which can further be divided into different domains of study. You must have heard physiological psychology or psychopharmacology, psychophysiology, cognitive neuroscience, comparative psychology, and neuropsychology. So these are different divisions of behavioral neuroscience, where neuroscience is being used as an umbrella term, but these are the further expansion of studying human brain, where physiological aspects of behavior are studied. They are understood as physiological psychology, and psychopharmacology you can understand like what are the important aspect of different pharmacological responses to our behavior. Same way, psychophysiology, cognitive neuroscience, comparative psychology, and neuropsychology are there. In comparative psychology, usually what we do, we try to understand, compare human behavior and other species. So human brain is comparatively studied by taking other species which are comparable, where different aspects of brain are studied. So same way, neuropsychology is covering very vast range of human brain and behavior. So this way, specifically it has been defined by Benton in 1988 that neuropsychology is interrelation of the brain with behavior. As we can take further division or a better understanding what neuropsychology do. So neuropsychology is actually study a segment of brain and how it has role in determining the behavior. So brain is physiological aspect, like it has some structure, and behavior can be understood as psychological aspect. So how our behavior are affected by brain and how the brain functioning affect our brain. In that way, neuropsychology is a kind of discipline which try to understand those connections which are between brain and behavior. So as we can also see that how neuroscience takes different further steps are different divisions which goes very close to neuropsychology, because here we include neuroscience, which is umbrella term, and again there are some specific medical branches which deal with the study of brain and behavior, specifically the brain and its functioning. Apart from that, neuroscience, behavioral neuroscience and neuropsychology are very specific to these sub-branches like cognitive neuroscience, what we have discussed earlier, psychopharmacology, psychophysiology, and neuropsychology, comparative psychology. So these are different subfields and sub-branches which actually tackle to understand the connections between brain and behavior. So this gives a blueprint that how brain and behavior can be studied from different larger perspective. So there are different disciplines actually which covers the way our brain function and how it affects our behavior. So the kind of connections between brain and behavior are well studied through these sub branches and subfields. So further we can study, because neuropsychology is a very popular and emerging branch of psychology. So how it emerged as a separate discipline, it would be interesting to understand that what is the developmental hierarchy or what is the historical perspective and development of this branch of psychology. So we will try to understand the historical perspective and development of neuropsychology. In those contexts, from historical perspective, as the branch itself is new, but there are some historical origin and historical traces which actually helps us to understand how neuropsychology developed as a specified branch. So there are some studies and that provide us impetus about the development of neuropsychology. So in that context, a first anatomical study is there which was carried out by Vesalius. It was first to conduct careful observations. What he did, that he made lot of observations of brain anatomy and which qualify the techniques of the cell doctrine in which he was trained. Because as we will be better understanding about nervous system, neurons, so we will have a more vast understanding about the process of nervous system. So these study will be more understandable in that context, because lot of technical terms like brain anatomy, cell doctrine has been mentioned. So his training was there which help us to understand how it was evolving. So what Vesalius did, he represented the beginning of a period in which lot of observations were made and other empirical sciences began to triumph over the ideas that had been handed down since the time of Aristotle and Galen, because these are they are the philosophers who have given their viewpoints on mind, body, behavior. So they have very vast views. So in that context we have prior origin about nervous system, brain functioning and behavior. So in that context Vesalius' anatomical study was very important and vital to produce that how he introduced the anatomical theatre in which students and doctors could watch dissections from the figure you can see, which is related to skull, and in that way he made careful diagrams of human anatomy. Another historical development what we can see is related to mind-body dualism, means mind and body are two separate entities. So in that context we can take example of Descartes. Descartes introduced the concept of a separate mind and body. He was again a philosopher who has produced his thought on mind and body. So he was of the view that mind and body are two separate entities. That's why it is being called dualism. What he believed about this dichotomy, that mind body are two dual entities, he was of the belief that all mental functions were located in pineal gland. Pineal gland is a centrally located brain structure that is now believed to play a role in sleep, wake and dark light cycles. So he was trying to locate that there are some bodily aspects and there are some mental functioning, and so in that context we can understand there is localization or positioning of certain aspects which are controlled by some mental and bodily aspects. Like he has given example of pineal gland. So it was the core of physiological aspect where all mental functionings were taking place. But again it was not well proven at later stage that this is not the complete center of all mental functioning, because later on as the science progresses, so lot of new discoveries, new inventions come which explains the process of behavior and its localization in the brain. So more clarity will come at later stage when we will study in more detail. He was more progressive in that sense that he was giving the philosophy of dualism, which suggests that a complete split between mental and bodily processes. And he tried to explain that there is automatic bodily reflexes, while purposeful behaviors were a product of free will. So he was highlighting the automatic body reflexes as a part of body and the purposeful behaviors which were the product of free will, that was the part of mind. So it was well explained by Descartes under mind-body dualism. Again, further development we can see that it was carried out by Gall under the phrenology. Phrenology is related to study of brain. So Gall introduced the idea that the brain was comprised of separate organs, each localized and responsible for a basic psychological trait. So we can specifically understand that brain is an umbrella term, umbrella part, which is comprised of different small organs. Means there are different parts of the brain which actually carried out lot of psychological behavior. Means brain is a vast and wider concept, wider entity, physiological mechanism which is responsible for many of the psychological behaviors. So separate parts of the brain are responsible for those psychological responses, psychological behavior and psychological trait. So Gall was very impressive in that sense, that he was highlighting the different roles of the brain in behavior. So what we can see that these psychological traits control complex mental faculties. We can see like cautiousness, combativeness and agreeableness. These are the traits, psychological traits. And also there are some simpler functions such as you can see memory, calculation ability, color perception. So these are traits are part of different mental faculties. So what phrenology do? It correlates the mental faculties described by the philosophers with the development of specific brain areas. Like we can see here cautiousness, agreeableness, memory, calculation, perception. So these are the mental activities which are determined, controlled and regulated by different specific brain areas. What we can draw from this corollary, that there are different specific location of the parts in the brain which actually facilitate, process and control different human responses and psychological processes. Taking forward Gall, there is a localization theory which actually tells that brain has different structures which are assigned for different psychological traits such as courage, friendliness or combativeness. Means in different conditions what we respond, how we behave, how we react, how we show different psychological traits. It is regulated by different structures in the brain as per French Gall postulated in his theory of localization. So his localization theory was very important in producing knowledge and giving insight about the brain mechanism. So what he told, that brain functions are dependent on the structures and the size of the brain area corresponding to functional area. So this is again important localization theory given by French Gall, which provide us a perspective about the brain functioning. We can have understanding what he had told during his time, that bigger the size of the area, more in the amount the skill is present. Means if you have a small size, a small part in the brain, so your skill would be subdued. But if it is bigger in size, so you may have bigger skill. Again it was criticized later on, but that time what he has produced means we can understand as a historical development of the neuropsychology. So behind the development of phrenology, this theory states that if a brain area is enlarged, then the corresponding area of skills is also enlarged and vice versa. So this was a localization theory produced by French Gall. At later stage we can search more traces of the development of the brain and behavior connection. there is a cortical localization theory. In 1861, Paul Broca discovered an area in the brain which is known as Broca's area. It is referred to posterior inferior region of the left frontal lobe where the motor speech is located. So, you can see in the diagram that in the left frontal lobe there is an area which is known as posterior inferior region, that is known as Broca area, and it is responsible for the motor speech. Thank you.